Good morning to all of you who are present here today. Now, as most of you would already know, we do have our new batch which has recently joined. So they have, for them, this is the first distinguished lecture in the series that we have. For many others, you would already know that under the PGP DGM program, we run a distinguished lecture series. This is primarily to complement the in-class learning that they have with the practical experience of working with these technologies. So what we do is in this series, we invite some distinguished personalities who've been working extensively, who have extensive practical experience of working in the field of digital governance and management. The first four, this is the fifth lecture. The first four lectures were in the series were by Shri J. Satyanarayana, Ms. Radha Chauhan, Shri R. Chandrasekhar, and Shri V. Srinivas. Today we are here gathered, we have gathered here to hear from another stalwart of digital governance, which is Shri Nandkumar Saravade. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correct, sir. Before I introduce my distinguished guest today, let me take a moment to mention a few points about the digital governance and management program, also to inform our guest of the day. This MBA program is launched. It was launched in 2019 under the aegis of National E-Governance Division, which is under the Ministry of Electronics and IT, Government of India. What the realization has been that digital technologies are everywhere, and both businesses and governments are looking to use it to transform both businesses and the working of government to give better services, bring in efficiency, etc. So in this program, we primarily focus on the capacity building within government and industry functionaries. Usually students are taken who are at the strategic or operational level. We try to ensure that they get necessary knowledge and skills to ensure the success of the programs that they are involved in, and starting from conceptualization to commissioning. So it basically covers everything, almost everything about digital governance and management. Currently, we are in the third year of the program with our first batch of students who are also present here. They will be convocating this year in 2022. And the program has participants from state government, various state government, central government, and private organizations too. So this is in short about the program. And now I'll go ahead and introduce our guest of the day. Shri Saravade served with the IPS, Indian Police Services, till May 2008, where his last assignment was Director Cybersecurity and Compliance at NASSCOM. NASSCOM is National Association of Software and Service Companies. During the NASSCOM stint, he headed NASSCOM's security initiatives, including policy formation, training on cybercrime investigation and knowledge for law enforcement organizations, advising NASSCOM members on incident response management, and organizing mass awareness campaigns on cybersecurity. At that time, he had also set up Data Security Council of India, which is a not-for-profit organization for self-regulation of the Indian IT industry on data protection practices. After his stint with IPS, he has been heading fraud detection units of banks like ICICI and Citibank till June 2016. Further to that, he has led Data Security Council of India as its CEO. And then he moved on to become the founding CEO of Reserve Bank Information Technology Private Limited, which is Retd in short. And he was with Retd till May 2021. So I hope I've covered some of what you've done, sir. This was a short introduction. And I will now let the, the title of his lecture today would be Cybersecurity Issues for Digital Government. So this lecture is for 90 minutes, out of which sir will talk for about 60 minutes. And we will keep 30 minutes for the discussion questions that the students will have. If sir would like to take more questions, I mean, it is up to you how you would like to take it. But once sir finishes his talk, we will, the students of students, two students from the first batch rather, they will be moderating the session and closing the talks. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Right, great. So thanks for the generous introduction. And this is a topic I often speak about. And I always start with a disclaimer that these views may be somewhat unpleasant to many audience members. But I come from government. I primary identity I always tell about people is I've been a cop and for 21 years, and I spent 3 years, another 3 years with this irrigation department in Maharashtra before I joined the IPS. So and my wife is in the IPS, so we talk a lot of shop at home. But the mindset would be of a government person who has gone out and dabbled in a few things and has some private sector kind of thought processes. Why I say this is because government gets a lot of flack for its service quality, consistency, sensitivity, and stuff, and somewhat justified. But people who are in government always feel that they don't get enough backing from within or from understanding from the citizens to really make a better job of their work. And it's a difficult problem, as I will kind of talk about it more in more detail, why it's a difficult problem. But it is also an opportunity to really change things in a very dramatic manner in a very short period of time. Just earlier today, I was talking to students in Mumbai on cybersecurity issues, and the kind of examples I wanted to give were actually before they're born. So I was talking about how when I was in the CBI, there was a time when people in MTNL were caught taking bribes for giving a landline connection. And today, nobody will even understand the example because there's no question of anybody wanting a landline and being asked bribes for paying for these kind of services, which are now so abundantly available. So that is the pace of change and the opportunity that I see. And I think it's a very exciting time to be in, to understand where we are, where we can contribute as professionals in this field. And I'm aware that the audience is both government, public sector, and the private sector, and then see what is the common agenda that we can have. So some of my views are a bit radical, having seen both sides of the table. And of course, at the end of the day, we have to come to a common agenda and then start working on it. So let me start showing my slides, which I put together for this session. And in terms of interactivity, I will be happy to receive questions during the talk or at the end of it, whatever is comfortable and convenient to you. So I will share the slides from the other device. Okay. So this is the title of the topic. And let me start the presentation mode. Right. So, cybersecurity, as we know, has become important, increasingly so. I remember in around 2000, 2001, we had done a case in CBI where there was a revenue leakage in BSNL. So all these, as we know, in the dot-com boom, a lot of investments got made into the telecom infrastructure. So almost $1 trillion worth of investment in the US alone for laying of optical fiber cables and so on and so forth. And what this also did was the data prices kept plummeting. And there was a very nice revenue model for criminals around that time who would route incoming calls from US to India through data channels. Of course, nowadays we are so used to voice over IP, etc. But that time these calls would come through the data pipeline and they would terminate on a local PBX, illegally PBX, and then they'll get routed through local telephone lines. You are getting a call from US, but you are seeing a local number at on the screen. Now, obviously, BSNL those days was losing money. It was 80 rupees per minute kind of revenue for them, and data charges were so cheap, so much cheaper. Even then, and now they are much lower. So that was the first case I saw in 2000, and that was really exciting to understand the technology, modus operandi, do the raid, find a small kind of a gada, as it is called in Mumbai, a small room in industrial estate. And the whole thing was operating completely automatically. There's no person there. We had to break open the lock and go in. And there was the equipment, and it was doing its job. So cybersecurity, of course, is very linked to how technology proliferation has happened. And as we know now, not only for government probably is probably late enter into the field, but all walks of life, we see technology not only making a difference, but actually taking over things. So the problem, so this today's talk, I wanted to talk about the problem of cybersecurity, which in this first line starts with difficult and then goes into complicated, complex, or wicked, which is the different variants of the problem. And then how we try to, the famous story of 5 blind men who were trying to find what an elephant is, and then how we go about solving this problem and what solutions are there, and what specific difficulties are there in government in particular, because I think we need to contextualize it to the government situation. So this is a this is the definition of a wicked problem. So I mean, all problems worth solving start from difficult, and there's no easy problem worth solving. And then they go into different degrees of complexity. So obviously, a complicated problem is different from a complex problem, and complex problem is again difficult to define, get a handle on. So the classic example given of a complicated problem is. So sending a man to moon was a complicated problem, but it was amenable to clear steps, the end objective, what systems and processes are required, and then it got achieved, right? So even today, if we were to send, India were to decide to send a man to moon, it is known that problem can be solved. It can be a long series of steps and some experimentation, some errors and some failures, but it is a solvable problem. On the other hand, complex problems are where things are not so clear, as you know. All sociological problems fall in that category. And wicked problems is a subcategory of that complex problems, where the problem is it's just very difficult to get your hands around it. There's no single silver bullet solution to the problem. Nobody can say, yes, I will solve the problem, gives the script, and then it gets done. It also keeps changing from time to time. So it's not that where you started from is what will be the situation. The goalposts keep changing. And if you look at one part of the problem, then it will affect other parts of the problem. As we know, in many problems in the sociological or economic field are such problems. I was reading about recently about how in Japan, there is a problem of small families. So Japanese society is shrinking every year. And why did Japanese choose to have small families? After the 1945 war ended and the nuclear bombs were dropped there was a severe shortage of food material and large-scale starvation, and people decided that it is best to have small families. And even today, when the economic conditions have changed, there is abundant food supply. In fact, Japanese are blamed for extinction of some of the whales because they like that whale as a meat they want to eat, etc. But the mindsets change very slowly, and in fact, there is a theory that real change happens only when there are generations which move away and new generations come in. Because new generations come with different mindsets and assumptions, and that is how real change happens. It doesn't happen in the lifetime of somebody who has seen something and is incapable of changing his or her identity beyond a certain point. So cybersecurity, I would think, is one of those problems. Probably it can be a complex problem. To solve it, we need to think of it as a complex problem, but definitely it can qualify as a wicked problem. So just in terms of the approach to solving complex problems. I was recently reading about this research which has happened about reductive tendencies. So since our ability to understand things, complex things is limited, we tend to simplify complex problems into something which fits in our current mental models. And that can be, I'm sorry if the screen is not visible, probably I'll send the slides later to Professor Nina and then she can circulate. But the reductive tendencies are obviously heuristics we use to get a sense that the problem can be solved. But the reductionism also leads to loss of essential details. And then we have something which is not very efficient in terms of how the problem gets solved. So wicked problems have that kind of feature that you can't summarize them to such a level that they are easy to understand, but then the solution is not going to be optimal. So we have to keep some of these things in mind. I thought I will include this in the talk to MBA program, because you will be dealing with similar problems as we go through your careers, and it would be useful to keep these things in mind as you upgrade your mental models to include more sophisticated ones and then use them as you go along. Now, coming to the environment which I talked about earlier, this is a famous quote from, I think, Mark Anderson, who built the first browser. So it talks of software eating the world. And, there was a time when one would be able to tinker with one's car and repair it. But now something goes wrong, you have to take it to the garage because the equipment to detect what has gone wrong, why a sensor is showing something which is worrisome. And then the equipment and the spare parts all are there. You can't repair your car anymore. In fact, recently, as you might have read, the US Congress has looked at a bill which will make the phones to be repairable and not just tradable, because that is one is the e-waste problem. But the other thing is the autonomy users must have on the technology that they use, and what kind of skill sets people should retain. I mean, all after the supply chain problem which arose during the recent war, as well as earlier when the tensions between US and China started rising, people in the US realized that most of their manufacturing capabilities have withered away. They don't even know how to manufacture certain things now. And all that knowledge has moved to China, and now they can't do without Chinese, though they don't like them, etc. But the point is, the software is extracting the knowledge which is there in humans and putting it in a system, and then the system becomes the problem solver, and the users become less and less intelligent about the problems. We saw this in the banks also. Earlier, people would know ledgers, and they would have fair idea about different processes and so on. And now things become so specialized, and people are so used to looking at screens that they don't know how things happen behind the screen. And that is the thing of software eating the world. I was talking to the young people in the morning, and there is a famous research happened some years back, and I'm sure it is now much more. But 1 in 8 couples in the US had met online, before they decide to get hitched. And that is an interesting statistic, because now the old model of finding your life mate in your neighborhood or your school or your workplace is gone, and people are looking at looking much wider and so on. In fact, in the pandemic, one of the things which people talk about is the opportunities of meeting other human beings and have romantic relationships and other relationships is reduced so much that we'll see fewer marriages and etc. But so this is the way things are moving. That software is mediating all our activities, and what it does is, of course, it helps us to form communities which are very scattered, and we can meet our long lost school friends and so on. But it kind of also separates us from the immediate community. That's a problem we'll talk about later when we talk about the issues which governments have to face. But coming back to the technology trends, there was a time when some of the largest companies in the world were physical world companies, the oil companies or the retail chains, etc. Now, if you see the top 10, they're all dominated by software companies or software-driven companies, and all the value extraction which is happening in the software sector or software-led sector. So, if you look at the other trends which have been impacting human societies, I think technological change is right there up with economic changes in the world, which have seen the rise of China, demographic changes with some societies shrinking, other societies growing. Africa will become the half of the world population next 30 years and so on. And of course, climate change is the biggest elephant in the room. So, so this is the issue. The point at the end of the slide is that software becomes very, very important, and it is important to have good software because it is not only going to run our life, but it can kill us also if it is not properly configured and operated. So the one interesting statistic I was recently reading about software is that, as you know, all software programs, applications are very long lines of code. So typically, I think Windows 10 had some 50 million lines of code. Even an application like Aadhaar will have, say, a couple of million lines of code, etc. And with so much coding, invariably the errors which are associated with any activity come in. As you know, the time of a single coder doing everything on an application is gone. We now have teams which do different parts of the application. Application itself has multiple features and components. And the error rates in the industry are about 70 errors per 1,000 lines of code when the coders do their job. And of course, there is a set mechanism which is used by good companies to weed out those errors before they go into production. But even in production code, there are supposed to be 15 lines of error, 15 errors per 1,000 lines of code. And now what it does is it brings those vulnerabilities which are then found by attackers and exploited. So the nature of software is such that we will continue to see these vulnerabilities for a very, very long time to come, even if we were to adopt the best practices in software engineering. So that is the bottom line, that the problem of how security will continue to keep us engaged will always be there. Now, a recent graph, it again says what I was mentioning earlier. The IT companies are growing. In between, obviously, they saw a dip relating to their valuation in the stock markets came down. But after that, they have gone up as the only sector which is actually benefiting from remote work and so on. And health, of course, was doing pretty well because of the nature of the pandemic. But if you see other verticals in the industry, they're all kind of stagnant or actually going down. Now, so I talked about how software is so critical for all our working. And this quote, which you see on the screen, has been taken from a 2004 article written by Nicholas Carr, who was the professor. And 2004 was when I was doing my PhD in IIT Bombay School of Management. And this became quite a controversial statement, that the title of the paper was "IT does not matter." And everybody was so scandalized, saying that how can you say that IT is so important now? But what the paper goes on to say, and I keep agreeing with this proposition even now, maybe I am biased because I'm a security person, but what it says is when a resource becomes essential to competition, but inconsequential to strategy, the risk it creates becomes more important than advantage it provides. So just take an example from the previous industrial revolution. When electricity came around, it kind of gave a competitive advantage to some of the industries which automated quickly. And then those who did not have electricity were at a disadvantage. But soon enough, everybody had electricity. So the advantage of having electricity in manufacturing as a resource went away, and the risk of not having electricity came in. So for whatever reason, if there was shortage of electricity, disruption, then that became much more an issue. So this we see happening repeatedly. I mean, if you see all top companies, they do have comparable technology maturity and so on. I mean, just taking an example from public domain, HDFC Bank was stopped by RBI from issuing new cards for several months because they thought that the IT capabilities of the bank were not up to the mark. Now, obviously, HDFC is a large bank, largest now a private sector bank after the merger, and it has significant technology investments, large teams, and so on. But still, it kind of became a risk for them because of the issues which might have occurred. But it was not then risk was more important than the strategy for that particular thing. So when we look at this, the famous story of five blind men, this cybersecurity problem in many ways is somewhat like that. Especially if you are coming from a technical background, sometimes the problem is in so many different domains that it takes a while to really figure out why things are happening the way they are happening. And it is therefore very interesting to see some of the larger incidents and then figure out what could have been done better and what needs to be done better to avoid recurrence of such a incident. So let's look at this famous case of a pharma company. I'm going to give private sector examples because governments don't talk about their failures much. And it is what is in public domain is mostly the corporate world, where especially regulated industries have to disclose what they have gone through. So this case is of Merck, and this happened in 2017. And they got a ransomware attack where they found that 30,000 desktops were showing that message that your data is encrypted and here is the address to send the bitcoins, and $300 in Bitcoin per computer, and that was the demand. Now the impact of this particular case was so severe because all organizations now essentially depend on electronic communication systems to communicate internally to the employees. So if that system goes down, then virtually there's no other way. And it's not only that, it's not only temporary disruption, but the company could do no work for 2 weeks because they had nothing up and running. And people are sitting out in the outside the office and trying to figure out what's to be done. All verticals of the company were hit. Somebody saying that 15 years of my work is lost. And this is what we see repeatedly happening. The damage sometimes is much more than what is intended by the attacker. And interestingly, in this case, the infection was traced to the Ukraine office. I mean, of course, 2017. So no link there apparently. But I'll tell you what is the link. So this particular attack happened because of this software or malware, as it's called non-PETIA. Or it's not PETIA. So PETIA was another one earlier, and this was not PETIA, different one. So that's how the name stuck. But this malware was created by GRU, which is a Russian army intelligence unit, which had created this particular one. They wanted to target Ukraine even at that point of time. As you know, 2014 onwards, the tensions between Russia and Ukraine have been going on, all publicly documented. And Russian hackers and Ukrainian hackers are attacking each other's system. And this particular malware was actually written to targeting Ukrainian systems, and it did bring down their electricity grid, but it also went beyond that and caused collateral damage with many other organizations. Now, the interesting part of this malware is that so let me step back a little and tell you about the zero-day vulnerabilities. Now, as I said earlier, there are always bugs in software, and the job of the system designers or system builders is to reduce those vulnerabilities. So they do it by testing and code testing and vulnerability testing and penetration testing and so on. But even then, some things remain hidden. And since software is constantly being written, some new vulnerabilities come in. So vulnerabilities which become known, but for which there is no countermeasure or no patch has been released by the manufacturer, remain open till they are patched. Now these are called zero-day vulnerabilities because that point onwards the vulnerability disclosure happens. That point onwards there is a lot of time for the attackers to exploit it. And so the many intelligence agencies in the world are very keen on finding such loopholes because that helps their job to collect intelligence from others. So all big agencies do it. This one particularly, as has been documented, is coming out of the work done by National Security Agency in the US. Now, National Security Agency is the equivalent of what we have in India, NTRO, but much more resourced. So the annual budget of NSA is about $13 billion, as what is known in public domain. And they have thousands of experts and code breakers to help do this kind of work. So this particular toolkit that they had prepared for themselves got subsequently hacked and released by some of the attackers in the public domain, and that is what helped the Russians then to build their own tool or their own malware on that particular stolen kind of property. So that is the nature of how countries are attacking each other and then benefiting from the stolen intellectual property. So in this case, actually resulted into collateral damage and brought down this particular company. The documented loss, since there were filings in Security Exchange Commission by this company, went to the tune of $915 million, almost 7,000 crore rupees. And they then had to lose time on the vaccine commitments, and they did have an insurance for covering $1.75 billion, but the insurance company refused to pay the amount, saying that it's an act of war, which is not covered in the terms of the policy. Now, as you know, the clauses always exclude acts of war or probably some of the other elements. And since Russian intelligence was involved, the claim was denied. Subsequently, of course, the company Merck went to the court, and the court has ruled in their favor. But that is the nature of cyber insurance, which is another way in which this risk is sought to be mitigated. So this is the kind of impact which was there on a company, and repeatedly this has been seen in various domains. So there was another attack in 2014 on Sony, which was going to release a movie which was broadly based on the North Korean head of state, which the North Koreans didn't like the way his portrayal was there. And they attacked Sony, and then they released. They not only dumped all the email traffic they came across, which had very uncharitable reference to some of the stars Sony had on their payroll, but they also released 2 unreleased movies on the internet, causing obviously loss to Sony. But there again, the people were going to cafeteria, no system was working. They were writing IOUs and paper and depositing, and then eating the food, etc. But that is the kind of disruption then we continue to see. And this is something which is, as systems become more centralized, complex, and as we depend more on these systems, the disruption becomes more critical. Now, typically governments, as we know, classify systems as critical infrastructure and accord higher priority to protecting those systems. So in India also, we have this National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, which is focusing on this problem. I will cover a bit of that later. But since the ultimate buck stops with the governments have to deal with all the problems which remain after all the individual entities have secured themselves, but are not able to protect finally. It all ends up at the doorstep of either the police or the government on the other side when it comes to cyber attacks. So apart from this, there have been many other incidents. There's a laundry list here. I don't want to go into each of these, but these have been in the domain of financial services. Now, financial services is a very favorite target of attackers because there is money to be made. And the famous quote, as you might have heard, of the bank robber, was very famous during the early 20th century, Willie Sutton. He was finally arrested by FBI. And then he was asked this question as, why do you target banks only? So he said, that's where the money is. So everybody in the underworld looks at money as something which is their primary objective, and money can fuel other things also. So money is always the target of choice. And the money can be made by stealing information or modifying information when payment instructions are being passed, and so on. And it can also be made by stealing information which is related to financial systems. So the first one here is relating to credit bureau hacking, and it had very stark kind of failures on the part of the company. Again, publicly all documented well. Very poor security practices, portals with default login and passwords, no prior playbook for dealing with a crisis, and so on. And this is something which clearly are not acceptable in terms of preparedness of important institutions. And this is a good lesson for all the financial sector entities. The regulators themselves can get hacked, and this was another hack on the second bullet, where the SEC collects a lot of data from the listed entities and that data can be price sensitive. There was another hack of wire services in the US, where the wire services were getting price sensitive information, company results, etc. Before they were published, the attackers were able to read which way the market will go, and they would take positions there and made almost $100 million. So information can be cashed out, as we know, and this is something which attracts attackers. So governments have penchant for collecting a lot of data, and the important thing is they should protect that data well, because it relates to citizens or financial assets of shareholders, etc. And the security of collected data from regulated entities is a problem by itself. So this is something again important to keep in mind. The third bullet relates to a service provider being hacked. So Deloitte is one of the big four companies. Again, public domain information, no, not singling out a particular company. $37 billion annual revenue. And their mail server had just single factor admin credential. That's how they got hacked and mails got released. So the point I'm trying to make is merely being resourced is not enough. You may have a lot of capabilities, but if they are not covering the entire gamut of the threat model, then you will still have problems. Coming to more recent incidents, Colonial Pipeline is a real-world attack, cyber physical systems or physical systems as they're called, where an attack on the IT infrastructure led to immobilization of the physical infrastructure. So Colonial Pipeline is a company which transports petroleum products in the US, and as a result of this particular ransomware attack, almost 40% of the East Coast petroleum outlets were not having any petroleum for a significant amount of time. So those kind of physical world impacts are also there. Pegasus is something I'll talk about a little later. But denial of service attacks, as you might have heard, is another category of attacks where the sites are just taken down. And now that everything is moving to cloud, and the three clouds, particularly AWS and Azure, and then Google Cloud, are some of the critical infrastructure for all software industry and user industries. The attacks which bring down that infrastructure is of concern. And this one was the largest till date, 2.4 terabits per second, and it was launched against Azure. And they were able to kind of deal with it, but there's no guarantee that the future attacks will not be bigger than this. In fact, till 2 years ago, the largest attack known was 600 Mbps, 600 Gbps. And now it has scaled up significantly as attackers discover new techniques of amplifying the traffic which goes to a particular server, and also enroll more devices into their attacking network. As more IoT devices come online, they all can be hijacked, and not all, but many of them can be hijacked and used in these kind of attacks. And the last one is the actual. This is also in the speculative domain, but New York Times carried a news item about this, about how Mumbai blackout was caused by Chinese hackers, etc. We don't know what happened because government has not really, it has denied, not given any details of it. So these are some of the recent incidents, and what these do is they tell us the impact which can be there in all walks of life, and not only commercial services. But let's come to another area of cyber risk, and obviously this is not seen as a risk by technology people at least, but sociologists and psychologists and political scientists feel that this is a risk. So democracy was always called the worst form of governance, except there being none better kind of thing. But democracy where the electorate can be swayed by fake news and false news and radicalized opinions is something which is worry. And this happened in 2016 elections in the US, as we know, very well documented attacks. The Russian intelligence was supposed to be involved. Some of the private data broker firms got involved. Very little investment and very high impact. These kind of operations these were. So as you know, in human mind, what is heard first is the one which is believed. And this is a quote from Mark Twain, or again, I attribute to many people. But lies are believed much readily than what is issued later as a disclaimer or as a factual statement. People want to believe bad news because that is the nature of how humans have evolved. We must have higher salience to bad news, otherwise we'll die. That was the law of evolution. If you don't pay attention to the rustle in the bushes, then the tiger may come out and eat you. It might be innocent, but you can't take the chance. So bad news always sells, and that's what media does. And the one upside of everybody being empowered to publish is that you can express your opinions. But then downside is that everybody has such a ability, so you don't know whom to believe. And the printed word had a certain sanctity and certain kind of assumption of scholarship behind it. Now all that is gone, and you have to take everything with a pinch of salt. But from a law enforcement point of view, there are two categories of this. One is what is visible. So open platforms like Facebook also have some of these problems. But the more peculiar or more insidious problem is what is there which is not visible, which is like platforms like WhatsApp, which are between people who just think like each other. Only people who like each other are then in a group. If somebody starts expressing different opinions, the person either wants to leave by himself or herself or is made to leave. And then it becomes an echo chamber of how opinions get reinforced. I will come to that a bit later. But let's look at the how the social media cycle operates. As you know, social media is a very powerful force in last few years, and it's all run by advertising revenues. And so Facebook in particular, Google model is slightly different. They just show ads during search operations, but it is like you go somewhere and you will see something. But Facebook is very interesting because it encourages you. And if you see the, all the icons there, WhatsApp, Pinterest, Facebook, Google Plus, of which didn't do too well, but Twitter and Instagram, all of them encourage you to post and share your life liberally. And when you do that, you are looking at responses. So, the moment you see a red notification icon that 4 people have responded, then you want to go in and see. And in fact, the statistics around how many times a person lifts his phone and looks at the phone, whether there is a notification or not, is something which is going up all the time. Now, it is a good practice advised on the side of productivity that disable your notifications if you want to do some work, right? But still, the habit of picking up the phone when you have no other thing to do, you will by default pick up the phone. So though that is very much there, and then you are rewarded with some likes being there, and then you want to react to that and so on. So this is the algorithm or the algorithm of algorithms which is there, and there are very smart people with PhDs in psychology who are writing and tweaking the algorithm and making you more and more addicted to consumption of social media. Now, this is okay, but when it comes to how this is not helpful to democracy, there is some recent research I thought I'll put here. What it does is, even if the platform designers are not meaning to amplify some of the radical opinions. So as you see, in every group, the radical opinions become more and more salient, and people who are otherwise reasonable start becoming radical by simple way how human mind works. So the platform may not even show you something which is radical, but what it does is it is interested in profit maximization, and it generates higher engagement, and it so happens that higher engagement comes out of something which is outrage driven kind of response. So this research showed that how over a period of time, the outrage driven response and the normal response are converging, so that people who are otherwise pretty equanimous in a physical setting, they will not react very violently, are very prone to doing that on the social media. Now, this has implications for democracy because the discourse becomes polarized, it becomes more violent, it becomes more deeper. In fact, the sting operation which was done on Cambridge Analytica, actually the Cambridge Analytica person is saying that people don't know what fears they have. And if those fears are tapped, those fears can be very hidden about the other community, different kind of foods, some kind of fake news about children being kidnapped, all kinds of theoretical possibilities become salient because that's the one which gets talked and noticed. So that is danger to democracy. Hopefully, people will learn and the platforms will become better, and people will become more responsible in consuming there. But it is something which is a matter for thought in terms of long-term stability of systems. But let's come to Pegasus. And Pegasus became very interesting in the news sometime back. And it was a little scary in the sense that Pegasus was able to infiltrate uh, mobile devices, which we know are like our second life. Or if you're a Harry Potter fan, they're like Horcruxes. The most important Horcrux is your mobile phone. And you sometimes it is said that your spouse doesn't know you as well as your mobile phone does, or your mobile phone knows you better than you yourself know yourself. So those kind of things which are there, your memories, thoughts, everything is there. And if somebody can enter there and look at what you're thinking, they can very well control you. Now, obviously, the software makers have a responsibility to secure software. And as we know, there are two main systems, and iOS and Android. And iOS was supposed to be more secure, but as we know, there's nothing secure in the software world. And there are 15 lines of code, 15 errors of code for 1,000 lines of code. The kind of capability this malware had was it could come in through SMS, WhatsApp, missed call, and without any zero action from the user. Missed call would just let the malware come in, and it could read actually SMS, WhatsApp. It could turn on the phone. It could gather your GPS data. It could record calls and so on. Now, of course, there is a certain use case for this in a state kind of scenario where the adversary is, your enemy. But how it will be used is something which nobody has any control on. And in any system, there is a concept of system creep, where the initial scope of the system is always expanded and it covers new use cases. And power once granted is not relinquished by anybody. I'm talking as a police officer, I've seen a lot of coercive power used by the state, and it always goes to the keeps going in the wrong direction. Now, this is something which again has implications for personal security. So if you are not very mindful of updating your phone, and if your phone is being used for doing government work, there is good guarantee that good possibility that somebody is going to target you. A nation state from another country will target you, and you will end up compromising some of the important data, personal and government data in that. The other manifestation of some of these problems are out of ignorance. So initially, the government agencies were very keen on using the Aadhaar infrastructure for direct benefit transfer and so on, and also disclose that they are doing a good job and comfort the population that somebody looking out for them. They ended up publishing data which is of personally identifiable information, and it was something which is not very desirable, because all such data can be misused by the attackers. Now, if you look at the digital trends in India, we have seen very impressive gains in financial inclusion. For example, Jan Dhan accounts for a very large number of people were opened, and India went from being a very adverse ratio in terms of percentage of people having bank accounts to fairly comfortable, and all that infrastructure came in handy when the pandemic happened. We have seen UPI kind of a very state-of-the-art system coming about. We have seen large number of mobile phones being used, and it's a device through which government services get delivered very efficiently. Internet penetration is going up all the time. Other enrollments have been now near saturation level. We have very good program around smart cities. Digital commerce is picking up all the time, and these numbers keep going up day by day. So maybe slightly outdated also. And in terms of use of social media, which we saw earlier, what are the risks there? The number of social media users is going up 37 crore in 2020. But the most popular one being Facebook, around 86% traffic, 86% users are regular users. And then a lot of app usage and very rapid rate of growth. So in smart city security, again, a very important area of infrastructure being protected. Again, very ambitious targets. The various components of it: traffic control, street lighting, utilities, transportation, safety and security, efficient use of land, waste management, all kinds of services are getting covered. But the challenges on there are that a lot of this hardware which will be installed, sensors and cameras and other things will be not much manufactured in India. In any case, the supply chains are so long that no one country really does everything. And a device can become vulnerable because there is bad chip on it, bad chip as in malicious chip, or there is a firmware which is not properly secured, or the software running, it is not secured. So it's a multi-component kind of an issue. So those challenges are there. Not enough testing is being done. There are all kinds of small, big vendors there. These protocols and standards in this are not really set because it's such a new area. And the awareness at the leadership level itself is very poor. For every security system, you need detection systems very capable so that you can find out if an attack is happening, where it is coming from, and how it is to be dealt with. And all those components are not really there. Last one, but not the least, there is a severe shortage of skilled people, as I will also talk a bit later. And this is really the Achilles heel, because you can buy stuff and install it, but if you don't have good people, all that stuff is not going to be very useful. There are various attack scenarios. I will not go into those, but this is something which again concerns us as we go into the more advanced infrastructure. So let's now look at how to what is the framework for securing all this, and how do we go about it. Is there any question, query till now? If I could take a pause and ask you.
Yeah, as of now, sir.
Okay, so if there's nothing, let's move on. So let's look at how computer security, where computer security begins. And essentially, when you talk of computer, it means either a desktop computer, laptop computer, tablet, phone, or even an IoT device or a small Raspberry Pi. Everything is a computer because it has that input, output, processing, storage, memory, everything in some form or the other. Now, a computer will authenticate a user using three attributes: knowledge, position, and inherence. These are called multi-factor authentication. And knowledge is like a password, a passphrase. When you enroll, you choose a password, and the password is replayed so that the system knows the secret, shared secret, as it's called, and it will authenticate and then authorize you to use services. Second is position. So if you have a piece of hardware which can help in identifying that it is a unique artifact with you, then it will it can also authenticate you. So typically, what we see, if you have been an income tax payer or a government officer operating bank account, they will be given a dongle which is plugged in, and then that dongle is essential to be kept in the system for ensuring that the authorized user is the one who is operating the software. Or inherence is what you are. So inherently, you have certain fingerprint, retina pattern, shape of ears, palm veins. There are many biometrics which are used and enrolled and then used to authenticate the user. So this is important to know, because in authentication, it is a good practice to have at least two factors to ensure that there is no stealing of passwords, because that is the most common attack which is happening. And then the access to resources can be given based on assured identity management. The other part in computer security is people, process, and technology. This is, of course, not unique to computer security, but this holds for all systems. If you want to build a system, design a system, upgrade a system, use it, all these three components become very, very important. So people, process, and technology in that order. People being the most important aspect. Users have to know what the system does, what it doesn't do, what harm can happen if they were to not use the system properly. And so good trained users, aware users is the first line of defense in security. Then you need to have good practices, like, typically many systems don't really do user validation at a frequent interval. So banks typically have process for every quarter, there is a revalidation of all the users. So if I'm a user and I get transferred, the next time I put in request, my supervisor must verify that request that I'm indeed in that role and the access is required to be given. Those kind of processes are important. And technology, of course, keeps improving. Functionalities come in, and technology has to be kept up to date, as we said about patching and so on. So that is something which is important to keep in mind. The third point is about vulnerabilities, threats, and incidents. So as we talked about software bugs, but by themselves, bugs are not harmful. Till the bugs are capable of being exploited, they are not a worry. So there has to be a threat which will exploit the vulnerability. And once a threat exploits the vulnerability and causes some harm, then there is an incident. So that is the hierarchy of events. In information resources, classically there was used to be this CIA triad, as it was called. Three attributes of information were important: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And now with Internet of Things and digital systems, now we've got a fourth one added called safety as the attribute how the system should be designed. Now, confidentiality is in government parlance, for example, if there is a cabinet meeting note which is confidential, a lot of government documents are secret, then they should not be falling in wrong hands, or they should not be seen by people who have no access rights to those, and so on. So that is the confidentiality part. The military secrets, war plans, scenarios, everything is can become confidential and be protected. Integrity is what is there should not be modified. So if now we have this big initiatives like Ayushman Bharat and other health initiatives, and if the medical records which are stored centrally, which may get stored centrally, start getting modified and people suffer harm because of that, that is an integrity attack. And this can happen, and this can happen very insidiously because unlike a financial transaction, if it is modified, there is an unintended beneficiary and some victim who knows that there is a financial loss. In these kind of records or land ownership and so on. So the integrity of information is very important in various government systems, and this is important attribute to keep and protect, to keep in mind and protect. And availability, as I said, the DDoS kind of attacks, if a system is not available for a certain amount of time, that may lead to disruption of services, and especially if a government service gets disrupted, which can have very serious consequences. If some safety related systems get compromised, it can have actually health and wellness kind of impact. Suppose a nuclear power plant operating system gets hacked and some incident is caused, then that can have very serious consequences. Just some of the worst scenarios that one can think of. So in protecting information, this security framework of prevent, detect, respond has been the classic one. It has been expanded now, and I will cover that a bit later. But it is important to move things upstream. So whatever can be prevented must be prevented to reduce burden on the respond kind of a thing. As we saw in pandemic, prevention was by far the best way to reduce the burden on the healthcare system, and that could be achieved by quarantining, masking, and then eventually vaccinating. So important to keep things in the prevent side of things if you want to really reduce burden on the response side as well as reduce damage. Then defense in depth. In security, the important idea is there is no single silver bullet for security. You have to have multiple layers of protection. Something which will fail in one layer has to be caught by the other layer, and so on. So defense in depth becomes very, very important. And there is finally the concept of risk management. This is again not unique to cybersecurity, but in risk management, you have to assess what is the risk, what is the probability of the risk, what is the impact of the risk, and what is the likelihood, which is the probability, and then prioritize risks based on high frequency, high impact, or low frequency but very high impact kind of things, and you have to address those risks first. So risks can be avoided. If you don't want to take a risk, you can avoid a particular area of business or government activity altogether. But by and large, the area which is most attention in investment is mitigation. So you can put good controls on risk and manage the risk in a mindful manner. And that is how all businesses operate, that risks are always there. Without risk, there is no probably gain to be had in a competitive sense. In government, you have to run certain services irrespective of what the cost is, and then it is important to mitigate risk in that activity by ensuring that proper controls are designed, tested, and operated. Some risk can be transferred in the private sector. As I said, cyber insurance is one way to transfer the risk. And in fact, all commercial enterprises transfer the residual risk to government by looking at government to protect them, and some risk has to be accepted as a cost of doing business. So that being the case, let's look at what is special about cyber risk. One important thing to keep in mind about cyber risk is that it's an adversarial risk. There is a adversary on the other side. Unlike many other risks, like say natural calamities or something which is going to happen as a result of interplay of multiple independent variables, there is an adversary here, and the adversary is operating in a developed marketplace. So if it is a nation state adversary, that adversary is actually very capable, and it is assisted by research capabilities which it has. In even cyber criminals that we see are assisted by people who are developing malware, people who are distributing malware, people who are recruiting mules who will take out the cash and pass on the cash in exchange of a commission and so on. And that is the very evolved market system that we see. And cyber criminals in one jurisdiction are tolerated by that particular nation because they always operate outside their jurisdiction. So this is the adversarial risk that we see. And what has happened is a lot of attacks have become automated. So the initial effort which was there is constantly diminishing. The marginal cost of the attack is always reducing, and you can launch many more attacks based on the same infrastructure. And that is something we have to keep in mind, because the volume and sometimes the severity goes up because of the diminishing cost and the increasing attack frequency. The risk is also constantly mutating. It is changing all the time. Some factors may go up. Most of the factors keep going up, but some factors may go up, some may go down. So what controls you are putting in one area may be not required. So that is a bad investment or wasted investment, and so on and so forth. So this is something which is very important to keep in mind, because then putting a number on the damage potential is very difficult. As we know, in insurance, say take health insurance, there are always very detailed data points to assess the risk and then quantify the premium. But in cyber risk, that becomes difficult to arrive at. The risk area is also so complex that individual organizations, however well resourced, are not able to fully quantify the risk and fully understand the risk, and many risks go beyond the capabilities of individual institutions, which is where the role of the government comes in terms of creating industry level or nation state level capabilities. And actually the damage caused is much beyond what is the immediate loss, can go into remediation, can go into loss of business opportunity costs and litigation and so on and so forth. So this is the scenario in cyber risk, particularly focusing on cyber crime. The traditional model of one perpetrator attacking one victim is no longer true. One perpetrator can attack thousands and hundreds of thousands of victims. They have very low technology costs now with cloud coming in and machine learning coming in. They can really craft all kinds of unique mails which go to various users, making the job of spam filtering, etc., very difficult. They always operate out of jurisdiction, as I said. So it's very difficult for the police to catch anybody and make example out of them. And serial crime earlier was the norm. One person was committing only one crime at a time. Now they can commit many more crimes. Now, in terms of understanding the framework, especially for government officials, it is important to take note of the privacy issues which have cropped up recently, and they are very important to keep in mind, because after the Puttaswamy judgment, there is a very clear finding that privacy is a fundamental right, and it needs to be equated on par with right to freedom, life and liberty, and so on, other freedoms which are enshrined in the Constitution. And the data of a person has to be treated with more seriousness. And government sometimes is very cavalier with this kind of expectation, but increasingly that will become important, and citizens will have expectations and recourse if that is not done well. Now, I talked about that exposure of other numbers inadvertently, whereas the other law itself says that the other number will not be displayed. It's a hard-coded provision in the Other Act, and there are consequences. Of course, no prosecution has been brought about, but it is something which everybody has to take note of, including government officials. Now, if you look at I don't want to go into the provisions of the data protection legislation, which is on the annual, and which may get changed further for various public policy purposes. But the principles are important to note, and these are based on the principles OECD came about with. They talk about notice to be given to the data subject, and the data is being collected. So if you go to a place where there is a notice saying that this area is under CCTV monitoring, that is a notice given to the person that he may choose to enter the place or not. In fact, in Zoom also, there is a notice that the session will be recorded. So if you want to continue or not, etc. So notice is important. And as we get more used to these principles and see them being deployed elsewhere, we should implement these in the government systems also. And there are other principles like purpose. Data should be collected for lawful purposes and should not be used for other purpose than that it is collected for. Consent should be taken, consent should be explicit, the data should be protected well, and so on. And people should have a right to look at the data, their data being held by government systems, and correct it if it is not properly recorded. All this puts a lot of burden and responsibility on the IT system designers and operators and resource allocators. So that's about privacy. Now let's come to the framework. I'm mindful that we are slightly running behind time, but I talked about the prevent, detect, respond framework earlier. But this is the globally accepted framework brought out by NIST, which is a research body in the US. It talks of slightly expanded form, identify. So you have to know what your assets you have to then protect them, you have to detect things going wrong, you have to respond quickly by having scenarios and drills and so on. And you should be able to recover the system to the original state as much as possible in a very quick manner. Now, there are various elements to this framework, and I will just take one example of what kind of granularity can be there for the system designs. So if you look at this graphic, it talks of starting with the identity segment. So you have to identify and see who accesses the information in your organization, whether the person has the need to know, and then what else, how long it is to be there, and so on. So role-based access and so on. You also need to conduct background checks. Of course, this is true of all organizations. When people get recruited in government, of course, people are there for many years. But in private sector, especially, people come and go. Attrition rates are very high. So every person coming in has to be assured in terms of what background the person had, and does the person have any record of any malicious activity, etc. And it's not that the person making a mistake should not get another chance, but then what access to information person can get is something else, which is a decision. And they should not be generic or common accounts. Every person must have their own account so that it is easy to attribute accountability and responsibility for actions and so on. And so on and so forth. So there are many controls which come out of this framework, and all of these have a lot of activity behind them. It needs budgeting and resourcing. So this is the framework which has to be implemented. But it is not adequate to just implement the framework, but to constantly improve it. So if you look at the maturity journey in all ISO kind of standards which is there, it starts from initial, it goes into developing, and there are various attributes which continue to improve. And that is the journey which every organization must aspire to if they want to reach to the optimized level where things are running in a proper, secure manner. The usage of resources is adequate and appropriate. And that is the state where it should remain in terms of how system maturity is happening. Now, coming to problems specific to government, as we know, there are a lot of constraints which government officials face, and sometimes they are very frustrating. First and foremost is the size of government itself makes it a very large target, right? You cannot miss a large target even if you are very sloppy or casual as an attacker. So government collects a lot of data. It has huge, humongous data sets which it has, like take Aadhaar, for example, take income tax records, PAN database. Of course, some of these are outsourced, but still the government-owned data is very, very large in size. And this makes it a very attractive target. The awareness, so governance is not about government nature as an organization, but more a quality of how the decision making happens. So in this case, awareness, the business imperatives which are there in government, there are very ambitious schemes which are announced. Obviously, the political leadership would like to show very quick results in a short time. So they keep driving the civil service at a very fast pace. And that leads to some unrealistic kind of timelines and targets. And that is something which is not very helpful for securing systems. The agility of decision making is low because you have to go by very old ways of documenting. I mean, I still remember in CBI, we used to write those green sheets by hand, and each case was like a chiseled piece of art of work. Of course, that is not sustainable, so you have to move into more automated ways, eliminate paper, re-engineer processes to make them more efficient, and all that comes as a governance agenda, and it has to go on. The lack of measurement in government is always worries me because things are always very subjective. And just take individual performance appraisal report that we have. They continue to be very subjective, no metrics, because the systems are not designed to capture metrics and use them in understanding the optimality of resource usage, efficiencies, best ways to allocate funds and so on. And the mindset is not very evidence-oriented decision making. It is all subjective and what I feel is the right kind of thing. And I'm not wanting to pinpoint any individual, but this is the general mindset, which I also have gone through, that because that was the norm. And this needs to move to more metric-driven and more objective and more accountable and more transparent kind of ways of doing things. So, and last one is generalistic. As we know, the specialists in government get very little autonomy in terms of planning, executing budgets, and sometimes decision making is delayed. Wrong decisions get taken because specialists don't get to have their say. Culture is of people not speaking out. So it is not a very efficient decision making environment if we focus on that particular aspect. Then the other side of problem specific to government are about so talent. When I talk of talent, I'm talking of the contemporary nature of talent. As I said, the skill sets are constantly changing in the technology sector, and security also has to keep pace with that. Now, in government, when people join, they join for lifelong careers, and then they have certain operational responsibilities. The training opportunities are low, training resources are fewer, incentives are less. So the upgradation of knowledge doesn't remain at the same level, and there is no hire and fire policy. So it is very difficult to bring in replacement resources and so on, which is from a system point of view an issue which continuously faces government organizations. Motivation wise, I think the results of what the government officials do are not very visible to them because there are very large systems, and sometimes the noise in the system is overwhelming. So the benefits are not really very visible, and so it kind of may impact motivation and work culture, etc. The process is very laborious. Procurement processes are very long and very documentation oriented, sometimes not very efficient. And sometimes the L1 issue results into procurement of technology, which is not really the best. And it can also be very piecemeal approach when it comes to that. So in India, I saw probably this is the last slide. So if you're worrying about the length of the presentation, but what we need to do, we already have some building blocks. The law is there on IT Act. Various other laws have been passed to empower data collection, data gathering, and how the data will be used. Data privacy law is on the anvil. So the legal framework is very much coming in place. The structure in terms of security is the organization like CERT and NCIPC have been set up. They have very long way to go to really mature and deliver at a level of effectiveness, but that is a function of how much investment is happening and what kind of capability building, knowledge aggregation, knowledge transfer happening, and so on. So this is something which always remains a work in progress. Many initiatives have been taken, but if you look at the overall funding levels, which is one good metric of how seriously the matter is taken, other countries are definitely spending much more than what we have been spending. And this results into some chinks in our armor, which can be exploited by small and large attackers. So I already talked about what needs improvement. Privacy framework has to be put in place if we want to get trust of the citizens and scale the systems all very well. customer grievance redressal mechanisms have to be much better. Every system master feedback loops must get the whoever is badly affected or doesn't get the right service should be heard. There has to be, like private companies do, social media monitoring to actually listen to the complaints which are not coming into the system but are being expressed out there and to act on them. And in cybercrime in particular, the old way of police investigator traveling to another state to do investigation is no longer valid, because cybercrime in India now happens in 4 states simultaneously, as there are callers in one state, victims in second state, funds being transferred to third state and being withdrawn in the fourth state. So that kind of mechanism, which the old antiquated one, is not valid, and it needs to result into some changes in the criminal code of procedure, etc. That re-engineering opportunities are everywhere, but I think we need people to take ownership and push them through the system, and then get them the downstream workflows and IT systems in place. And the supply of cybersecurity skills, which I talked about, is very important. And last but not the least, the cybersecurity strategy is in the pipeline for last 2 years. Strategy is just a document, like drawing a map, and it has to be continuously redrawn. Like we look at Google Maps every 10 minutes when we are going to some place. Strategy has to be some document like that. We are hearing about this strategy for last couple of years. But if we are not getting the strategy document out, then when will we work on the projects which will emanate out of the strategy? So I think we have a lot of gap areas which, in my personal opinion, are in needing attention. And this is my favorite quote, that anybody can give you good strategy. There are a lot of nice consultants out there who will prepare good, beautiful looking documents, and that strategy will be very useful also. But that is not the key. The key is execution, and what people do on the ground, what hands-on experience that they acquire, what insights they get, and what kind of efficiency and innovation they can achieve in their work is really the key. So it applies to everything else. It applies to cybersecurity also. And I think we have a long way to, as I said, very exciting field, a lot of opportunities to make a difference. And but we have to work together, because as today's world, no single person who will make any big difference. It is the teams which make a difference. So within the teams and across different teams, more collaboration, more innovation, and less of competition, and less of interpersonal agenda kind of pushing has to be there. So this is what I wanted to say. I have some coordinate details here. I think we have some 10, 15 minutes or beyond if you have time to have questions and answers.
All right. First of all, sir, thank you for the enriching talk. I think hearing from you and your experience, as experience from a practitioner, is certainly very different, and a lot more people would have got some perspective here. The students in the panelist, they have attended sessions in social, legal, and ethical aspects of digital transformation, in cybersecurity related subjects. So a lot of us would have surely connected and would have developed an understanding with your session. And very rightly said, strategy is more like a live document. It cannot be a static document, which is more like a vision and objective and principle sort of a document. Has to be live and refreshed probably every year or at a periodic basis. Sorry, I did not introduce myself. My name is Shiv Gupta, sir, and I work with Accenture Business and Strategy. And prior to that, I worked with around 5 years with Ministry of Electronics and IT, and had some good time working with NASSCOM very closely while we were all gung-ho developing Arogya Setu. So NASSCOM extended all support in rallying all the private companies and giving us some stress testing, performance testing support, immediate basis. Sir, I had a quick question. So like you had a slide on social media, and we know now that it is one topic that cannot be ignored, and it is always there in all cybersecurity related talks nowadays, and it's a very important issue. So to make internet as a safe space, open enough for collaboration but secure enough for, say, women, children, elderly, what more do you think the government can do? Because for example, in UPI, so UPI has become almost like a household thing, but UPI frauds were not anticipated. And now government has done a lot to help people cope up with that. So what more in your, want to hear your thoughts about it? And after that, I'll request everyone else to seize this opportunity, and excellent opportunity to ask some questions. You can probably raise a hand, or you can type in the Q&A section also. I'll read out the questions for you in that case. Sir, your thoughts on the question, please.
So thanks, Shiv, for the background in the question. I'm sure you would have had some fun working on this very important project. So I think, as I said, we have to move things upstream and make systems secure by design. And in security, there is a saying that there are two sayings actually. One is that no management problem can be solved by technology, and the second one is, but technology solutions are management workarounds. So many times techno solutionism becomes very driving force for implementing some kind of technology. But if there is a problem which is in the management side, then it needs to be addressed likewise. So in re-engineering, that I think is a very important thing to keep in mind. The second point is when you're talking about security, it is very specific to a particular situation or an environment or a product or a service. So you have to study the particular service and then see what problems it has already shown or what can be there, and then take countermeasures. As I said, the problems have to move to the prevention side. And since you mentioned about UPI, I recently written an article on how UPI frauds need to be addressed by design. So my hypothesis is that I am subject to contradiction and debate. But UPI, the way it is designed, puts the responsibility of reporting a fraud on the user and the user service provider. For example, if I have a wallet from, say, PhonePe or Google Pay or whatever, if a fraud happens, I have to report to Google Pay. Then there is a bank involved, which will report to RBI. And then the user is told to go to police and file a complaint. So the whole thing is of playing football kind of thing. Whereas my suggestion to NPCI was in that article that there has to be the platform itself must have a feature of flagging fraudulent transactions. So if I come to know that something, so if I'm expecting to receive money and money actually goes out of my account, which is a very common modus operandi there, then I immediately can flag it saying that no, this is not what has happened. If I have to look up website and call up people, that money is going to be withdrawn quickly. So within UPI, there has to be a feature of saying, okay, view the transaction, flag transaction, hold the transaction maybe for next 5 minutes, in which the transaction can get reversed, etc. Now, obviously, I'm not in favor of holding transactions because there are live situations where people are standing in front of each other and they're not going to wait for 5 minutes for the money to transfer. But if the platform has some feature of being able to get flag these transactions from the user, because user is the most best placed person to flag such a transaction. Not in all cases, because many users will discover it after several hours or days, in which case nothing much to be done. But the platform itself must have provided for some reporting of bad transaction. And I was saying that this is like setting up a new township, but having no police station there. Then you assume that all are good citizens and there's no need for a police station. But obviously, we know that some people are going to take advantage of the system. So security by design is one aspect, but obviously things will still go wrong. In which case, currently there is a initiative being run by MHA, I4C portal, where some reporting has to happen, and they actually have a feature of blocking funds, etc. But by the time information reaches there, it's already too late. So it is like more paperwork than anything else. Now, all this is also being done on a login basis. So people have to log in and see what is in the tray, and then they'll act on it. So if it is API driven, it can become much faster. So there are various tweaks which can happen in how the incident response can happen. Obviously, when we look at prevention as the approach, we can look at how users can be educated from time to time. At the time of enrollment, at the moment there is a new fraud trend comes up, if I am as a user, I open the app and actually I'm waiting for the alert to come that I have to approve a transaction. But in the meanwhile, I'm getting shown some screen that this is the new kind of modus operandi, so beware kind of thing. So that will help in educating the customers. So the approach of user awareness, approach of quick reporting approach of protecting users against faults which are not there of their own, moving the liability to parties which can do the best about solving the problem. These are some of the measures in which this can be done. So there is a book by Ross Anderson on security engineering, which he talks about ATM fraud because it was written a long time back. But here also he talks about acknowledging the problem, because many times the players don't have incentive to acknowledge. In fact, incentive to reduce the incidents by saying we don't have any frauds. And then the frauds keep growing because nobody is addressing the problem. So those kind of incentives have to be fixed, and then the problem will get solved to some extent. For others, I think there has to be some cashback, fallback mechanism. But it's a system-specific problem, so we can talk about that more detail. But every system will have similar issues, and then they have to be dealt with through a feedback loop and system improvement.
So now, if all other panelists, students, professors from all batches, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or type it in the chat section also. So meanwhile, yes, Rajita ma'am, do you have a question?
Sir, recently we heard in news about that 600 million blockchain issue, where cyber attackers could get a lot of money out of it. So is that also is a cyber security issue, or is it a technology issue, sir?
All such unintended losses mostly are cyber issues, cyber security issues. Though system faults can lead to inadvertent losses also, as you know. But that one 600 million case was definitely a fraud, and it was attributable to the way the systems were designed. And the challenge is, people who are very keen to build new systems, they don't have adequate security experience or resources in the team, if they do have a large team, to really secure things by design from the beginning. And security is always a secondary and orthogonal skill. It is, I keep telling people that you may find me very dour and pessimistic, but my pessimism is going to help you, because I'm going to tell you things which you may not like, but which will be useful to you. So I think every large system with high investment or high importance in terms of the number of data set of users or impact on breach, etc., must receive security by design kind of consideration. And it comes into architecture, it comes in through code testing, it comes into things like there is a new concept called DevSecOps, where DevOps was the initial one, where the continuous development was the model, but now security is very much part of that cycle. So those approaches are very useful. And as I said, there is no single place where it will get addressed. All these have to work together, and then you must have some good luck also.
Thank you, sir.
I think Mr. Uttam, you have a question.
Yes, sir.
Please.
Sir, my question is something what is happening on social media, and you raised a very valid point saying that the lie spreads faster than the truth and it gets multiplied. Recently, the WhatsApp has done an engineering where the messages are recorded as many times forwarded. Now, from the governance perspective, probably the idea was that the citizens will come to know that this message has been forwarded many a times. So is there something which we understand after such a long experience, whether the issue has been well accepted, or it is the other way around? Now citizens feel that since this is a well forwarded message, it is more true than being untrue.
I think very important observation, and I wouldn't know about this. My approach would be do a proper survey, ask people what really they they surmise when they see this many times forwarded thing, and then take a decision. Now, many times forwarded can be popular message or the indication that the message has originated far in your network. But whether it is that makes it a less trustworthy message or more trustworthy message is a matter which only can come out through some kind of perception survey. As we know, system designers are sometimes they make some assumptions, and systems also get used for unintended purposes. I mean, the famous story of how washing machines were being used in Punjab for washing potatoes is there. So system is designed for one purpose, but it gets used for another purpose. So it is a matter of understanding and keeping that feedback loop active to see whether that is something useful or something else needs to be brought about.
Thank you, sir.
Are there any more questions?
Yes, sir. I have one question. Sir, I want to know that going forward, neobanks or digital banking would be the next evolution of banking. And even in this year's budget, Honorable Finance Minister had also announced that to leverage development and adoption of financial technologies, then a digital rupee will be introduced, which would be rolled out by RBI in, say, by 2023. So then how would the government bring the trust of the customers into adopting neo banking, which will be fully digital banking, and adoption of digital rupee because of so many frauds going on?
So I think a neobank is not a well-defined term in the banking regulation. So banks are basically which are licensed entities by RBI to carry out banking activity. Now, there are also non-banking financial companies and there are urban cooperative banks. Those are well-defined categories depending on the constitution of the entity. Neobanks are basically, as of now, front ends for banks or NBFCs to get more business. So typically they are more into customer acquisition than banking. They have to pass on all these customers to the sponsoring bank to provide the basic banking services. And they are able to reach more customers through more innovative marketing, better, more efficient distribution, better customer experience, because some of the neobanks apps are very well designed, and they also have very interesting mechanisms to improve the engagement. For example, I was looking at the neobanks app, and it has a goal-oriented saving target. So I want to buy a new phone, and I have to save 70,000 rupees towards that, and the app will prompt me to say, okay, have you put money into this particular goal, and then that goal-based saving can come in. So those nudges and all what we hear and read in behavioral economics can also get used. But the idea is to improve distribution and improve financial inclusion. So financial inclusion, as you will recall, is not only having a bank account, but additional banking products like loans or insurance, financial products, and also to improve financial literacy, which is an important element of improving the financial decision making of the users. So neobanks can help out in all these objectives, and as such, they have their own legitimate role to play, and that is the whole proposition. I think neobanks is a more industry term, but recently RBI has come out with a digital bank circular, which talks about banks having only digital presence and how they do their business and so on. So that is based on the Niti Aayog report which came out earlier and some industry consultations which RBI has done. But that's why I'm saying the opportunity to do things in a new manner, in an efficient manner, at a very low cost of transaction is something which everybody is looking at, which is where the neobanks and the digital banks fit in the whole thing. Now, coming to digital rupee, that's a bit of a very undefined area as of now, in my personal opinion. So the concept of central bank digital currency or CBDC came about as a response to cryptocurrency. And the cryptocurrency, as we know, started with Bitcoin, and then there are other cryptocurrencies which came in. And people's interest in Bitcoin was first as a something which cannot be monitored, and that was the primary attractive feature of the Bitcoin, that no government will know how I am using my money and whom I am dealing with and so on. that was the government-less kind of an environment in which was envisaged. But eventually it went into speculation that if I put 500 in Bitcoin in 5 years ago, now I'm worth 50,000, etc. So that kind of quick gains or windfall gains kind of mindset is operating, which is leading to a lot of investment into that. Now, obviously, central banks had to respond to all this. And so they also came out with their own version of digital currency, which is not going to pull away people from crypto assets, because crypto assets attraction is very different from central bank digital currency. Now, many people believe, and I sometimes tend to agree with them, that digital currency, CBDC, is a solution which is trying to address a non-existent problem. And I will tell you why. There are countries where digital inclusion is very low. Means of digital transactions, financial transactions are not there. So this is where the CBDC makes some sense. But in India, we already have a very good platform called UPI, which is enabling all of this real-time payments. And if there is a need for another platform, which is required sometimes from redundancy perspective, another platform can be floated. So another NPCI can get created. There's a talk of a new umbrella entity and so on, and which it could float its own platform, and people can use one or the other, and or both, depending on their convenience and incentives, and that would take care of the problem. The concept of CBDC was developed very well in China, and was recently deployed in the Winter Olympics, which happened. And the Chinese government has a very different objective of monitoring all transactions, keeping a tab on the citizens' activities, which is not what the democracy wants. So it's a very different end objective that they were looking at. Of course, they also said we want redundancy, and there the electronic transactions were happening on mobile platforms and not a neutral platform. Like India, we have a UPI, which is a kind of a neutral platform, but there the transactions were happening on Tencent and those kind of private company platforms, which is what the government wanted to move people away from. So the scenario and the use case in China was very different. In India also, we are seeing RBI talking about it and so on. But my personal opinion is that it is something which will, obviously, such a platform will require large investment. And if it can be brought out as an alternative to UPI, I think it will be a desirable development. But to create a CBDC where the central bank, and of course, recently RBI said that it will not be interest bearing, etc., which is clarifying that the disintermediation of banks which may happen, because if central bank is standing guarantee, then all deposits will go there, right? So banks will not be able to attract deposits, and then the banking function itself will collapse, because it's out of aggregated savings that banks do lending. So there are a lot of systemic stability issues which are there, so which will get probably discussed and resolved. But I am a skeptic when it comes to both cryptocurrency, which is not currency but crypto assets, and it's purely based on speculation. So it is not something which should people should go into. And CBDC, which is a problem, which is a solution which may or may not be required in India. That's my thought. I have written a couple of blogs on my LinkedIn page on this. You want to take a look at that.
Sure. Thank you, sir, for your deep insights.
Thank you, ma'am, for the question as well. I just saw, I think, Mr. Manish, you had a question, is it? You raised your hand.
Yes, sir. I actually wanted to ask, sir, that mostly in case of a cyber crime, nowadays it's the law enforcement agencies which take an action. So do we have individual private, professionals who are actually, whom the victim can approach for getting a relief? Or if so, are they authorized by the law enforcement agencies to do so?
So law enforcement is a very core state function. As we know, sometimes I used to quote this in 2015, I met somebody, very senior person in a Big Four, who said we must go into cryptocurrency, and we should develop a cryptocurrency and then sell it to government and make money. So I told him that there are 3 or 4 core government functions: foreign policy, military, law enforcement, and central bank currency, or currency, basically. These are 4 core government functions, and government will get out of all other things, but not these 4 things, because that's what defines a sovereign entity. So that being the case, we already saw this in currency area. We also see this in law enforcement. Law enforcement is very much a state function, And obviously it doesn't, I mean, as a former police officer, I feel that it doesn't receive adequate government attention or funding, but it is something which only government can do and should do. Private people should not have any role in that. We see these, private security and all that, which are like on security side point solutions, which are not scalable nor are they efficient. They are like, which at least some kind of sense of security kind of thing, but they don't solve any problem when it comes to really serious incidents. So it is the monopoly of the state to use violence, and in some ways things like arrest and all those things are violence only, but they are authorized to the state by the people because they are required from time to time, and then the state has to fulfill that particular function, of course, with proper oversight and proper efficiency, but it is definitely a state monopoly.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right. If there are any more questions, then please ask. Else, then I will request. Any more questions at this point of time? I think, sir, if there are any more questions, we can always pursue you offline as well. So at this point of time, I'll request Rajita ma'am to please present a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Shiv. Sir, I'm Rajita. I belong to the first batch of PGP DGM course. So, sir, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude on behalf of all of us, IIM Vaisag, PGP DGM, faculty, students, the entire people who have attended this webinar. The webinar has been very informative and interesting, sir. Usually what we feel is that cybersecurity classes are tough with a lot of jargons, technical terms, etc. But you have made it very simple and we could follow it very well. And we all know that the electronic revolution is going on. The emerging technologies are affecting common man's day-to-day life, and how important the cybersecurity, cyber aspects are. So actually, most of us are government servants. Some of us are from corporate sector also. So this webinar, we would definitely has imbibed knowledge, and we would surely transfer it to the concerned authorities, to our colleagues, and we will try to convey the significance of cyber security aspects to the decision-making authorities, so that we can plan accordingly and implement it very meticulously, sir. Thank you once again, sir. On behalf of all, thank you once again.
Thank you. I'm always open to questions, and thank you for the opportunity for talking to all of you, the IIM faculty. So take care and see you again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.